One of the things that I really love are inspirational stories about people who have triumphed over something difficult. But none of those stories take the journey in a straight line. There are lots of uphills, downhills, loops back, two steps forward, three steps back kind of thing. And so I mean, how was that for you? What were some of the setbacks that you faced, and how that did that affect your journey, I guess?
Yes, what a great question. And it's so true. I was nodding my head vigorously as you were making those comments. And, with the people that I work with, my clients, I often describe it as it's like a stock market graph that you look at, and you want to see that overall trajectory going up over time, but in the moment you feel that dip so profoundly, and it can get very discouraging. But again, I tried my best. I didn't always succeed, but I tried to see it and recognize it as a dip. And part of my personality is, I want to be going up all the time. Those dips, I don't have time for that. I don't want that, right? But I was listening to my husband, and I remember I was on my walker, and my husband was so supportive, and he would get out and walk with me down the driveway, just a few steps or as much as I could muster. And then we celebrated when I could make it to the mailbox. And so he would walk with me a little bit, but he noticed that I was trying each day to like double my distance. He said, "Honey, wait, like you got to dial it back," because what happens is I would come back into the house and I would be so upset and frustrated that I was so exhausted. And then the next day I wasn't able to do anything.
Right.
And so I really had to sort of control the flow of energy, and control that. Even I felt like in the moment doing more, that I had to step back and take a look at the long term of where I was trying to go, and that I couldn't do so much today that I was going to jeopardize tomorrow. And that was hard. That was a really hard thing. I did experience a relapse. And so I was about 4 months out, and I was walking independently, which was just so euphoric that I could put my cane aside and be able to again walk on my own. And I was walking up and down the street and just feeling great about my recovery. But the weakness returned, and I again lost the ability to walk on my own. I was back in the hospital for another week, another round of treatment. And then that sets off a lot of other fears. How many times will this happen? Is this really a chronic condition? Will I be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life? And so those ups and downs were definitely physical, but more so they were mental, and how I chose to see what was happening. If I allowed myself to feel those fears, but not allow the fears to rule my behavior and my overall outlook. And so, there were physical and mental dips in that journey, but I felt the whole time that there were lessons that I needed to learn that were being presented to me. And some of them I could see at the time, and some of them were revealed just, along the way, and still are in many cases. But I never stopped looking for those lessons, because I thought this was happening for me in some way.
I mean, going through this whole journey, what was your biggest source of support and inspiration? One of the other mistakes we tend to make in our society is that I can do this on my own. I don't need to ask for help. And asking for help is somehow looked at as a weakness or something to be ashamed of. And it really isn't. I mean, we're coaches. We try to communicate this to people all the time, right? But how did you finally allow yourself to open up to that need and actually learn to ask?
So I feel that one of the lessons I needed to learn was to ask for help. That was something that I was not very open to and very good at, because I found a lot of pride in being independent. And it used to be a source of pride for me. And so at this point, the universe is sort of showing me, okay, you're flat on your back. You literally cannot move. Now, what are you going to do? Right. And so there really wasn't any choice. I had to depend on others around me, like my mom, who for weeks was close to a full-time caretaker for me. And it was difficult because there were things I was not able to actively parent, during that time for my sons, because even cognitively holding a conversation for more than a few minutes, or even thinking through all the things that they were doing and how I could be helping them, there just wasn't enough energy there. So I was leaning in on my husband in a tremendous way. And he was holding down the fort in all aspects of the word. And, we had our basement was flooding, and he was dealing with that. And then he was parenting with the boys full time at home, doing school, learning at home during the pandemic. He was cooking their meals. He was, keeping the household running. And then also later, caring for me too. And while he was working full time. So it was a tremendous strain on him, but in many ways, it strengthened our relationship in the long term. And when you take those vows of in sickness and in health, it shine a completely different light on that when it actually happens in your home and in your relationship. And so my husband and my mom were two that I was leaning into in a huge way. I'm not generally the hugest fan of Facebook, but I decided that I was going to use it as a tool, and that tool was going to be for connection. And so I did openly share. I shared videos, photos, a story, stories of what I was going through. And I was able to connect with people, even if I hadn't spoken to them in a long time. I was craving that type of connection. And during the lockdown, when we weren't seeing people and I was too immunocompromised to really have any visitors, that gave me, a way to connect. Some meditation, some listening to classical music, and other things that I would even take into my appointments when I was having these really painful nerve conduction studies where these electrical shocks were being sent through my body. And I would have the music on. I would ask the nurse if she was okay with me having that music there. And I try to just adopt those principles whenever I could to stay in a calm frame of mind, even through the fear. We seek when we receive a diagnosis like this, our inclination is to seek others who have the same diagnosis.
Mhm.
We want to know that we're not alone. We want to talk with others who are experiencing something similar. But for me, when I joined online Facebook groups and other things with other GBS patients, I actually found them to be very depressing. And it was, frankly, it was a lot of negativity and a lot of staying in the difficult moments. And so I felt so strongly about creating the type of community that I wished I could find at that time, which was maybe others who don't share my same diagnosis, but who are on a similar path of growth and renewal, and who want more than a recovery. They want to come back stronger, mind, body, and spirit than before, and see it as an opportunity to do that. And yes, there are such difficult and painful moments, but we know that there's a way to look beyond that and to be around others who feel the same way. And that's really something that I thought I was lacking at the time.
Sorry. And after the work that you've done, you were able to pivot that from what was lost, from what wasn't there, what was the gap or your frustration, to the motivation to do the work that you do now, to now inspire those that are survivors or are going through something very traumatic and painful. And you're giving the message, let's rise above this together through mind, body, and spirit. As I am very curious about the brain of meditation and how that changes our neurological pathways, and to strengthen things that we didn't think were there, to uncover things that we didn't think were possible. I'd like you hopefully to touch on that, as well as like the rehab and journey to hike over 500 miles, because I think that is, whew, that's a feat that I'd like to do, and not without sickness, just I'd like to do it. So hopefully you can talk about that.